want to thank you all for joining the Secure Justice podcast. We're going to be speaking with the Angelo Quinto family today. For those of you that don't know his story, here in the Bay Area in Antioch, Angelo was a 30-year-old Filipino American. He's a Navy veteran, went to Berkeley High School, and on December 23, 2020, suffered a really terrible tragedy for this family and obviously for Angelo himself that we're going to discuss as we get into this conversation. It's a great privilege to work with three of my favorite legislative advocates. We had a really great working relationship on a bill that we're going to discuss later, and even before I was working with these guys, I was aware of the tremendous amount of work they were putting in. By their own words, they knew nothing they did was going to bring Angelo back, but that they wanted to prevent other families from suffering the same harm and tragedy and loss of life that their family went through. And so we're joined today by Bella, Cassandra, and Robert, just very amazing people that share a powerful story. As we were going through the legislative process a year ago, I can't believe the strength to be able to share a personal tragedy with complete strangers over and over and over. And they've been doing it for a number of years now on a number of different legislative fronts that we're going to discuss. And the silver lining, and what will hopefully make this a more positive sounding podcast, is they've achieved some really, really significant legislative wins that have definitely dramatically changed the landscape of use of force and policing and how to interact with folks that may be going through a mental health crisis. This was long before we heard of George Floyd and similar tragedies. And with the press that's going on right now after the latest legislative win, I'm really hopeful, and I'm sure they are as well, that this movement is going to spread to other states beyond California, so that everyone gets the benefit of the protection of the law. So for those, and a large percentage of our distribution list, our viewers, are not in California. We do work across the country. A lot of the conferences and things I speak at are actually back east. And although the recent New York Times article got you guys a lot of press, I'm not sure that everybody really knows Angelo's story. And Bella and Cassandra, since you guys were present and intimately involved in this scenario, and I don't care which one of you starts off. Maybe Bella, the way I've read the articles is it kind of, the story sort of started with you and your reaction, and then Cassandra eventually ended up recording the incident. So maybe Bella, as a sister, describe December 23rd for our audience, if you would, please.
Thank you, Brian. So on December 23rd of 2020, my brother, who I called Kuya Angelo, was experiencing a mental health crisis. It was an episode of paranoia and fear and anxiety that he'd experienced only a few other times throughout 2020. And usually he would be really concerned for his safety, for our safety. He would ask what's going on, and you could just tell that he wasn't his usual self. But on the 23rd, my mom and I, unfortunately, weren't being as patient with him, and that only exacerbated his fear. And so he held on to us, and that in turn exacerbated our stress in the situation. And eventually I told him I would call 911. And he just didn't have much of a reaction to it. And so I did call 911 because my dad was too far away. Um, and when they came, they assessed the situation and were very confused. They asked who the call was even for. I had sounded really scared on the call about my brother restraining my mom, and um, they asked, was it your brother restraining your mom, or was it your mom restraining your brother? Because it looks like your mom is in control. Um, so I confirmed it was my brother, and they saw that my mom had him in a bear hug on the floor of her bedroom. Um, but despite the live assessment of the situation, they did take him from her, position him on his stomach on the floor, um, putting his hands behind his back in handcuffs and crossing his legs together and pushing them against his back. And then, most notably, they kneeled on the back of his neck and upper back area, big area, for at least the last 4.5 minutes of this restraint. He was completely unresponsive. And in that time, my mom had asked twice if he was asleep to get them to check if he was responsive at all. And they ignored that until finally the paramedics arrived. And when they flipped him over, there was blood coming out of his mouth. His eyes were rolled up in his head, and he was just completely limp. My mom was there the whole time, but I basically only saw glances, and I just remember texting my dad that he looked purple. But we believe, for all intents and purposes, that he was killed on that night, December 23rd, around 11 p.m., 11:10 p.m., something like that. But when he was taken to the hospital, he was placed on 16 different drugs to keep his heart beating because he had the faintest heartbeat reflex, but nothing else. Very, very minimal brain activity. And eventually, when his body couldn't process those drugs anymore, he was officially declared dead on the 26th, around the afternoon.
So, Cassandra, when you're watching this, there's always a special bond between a mother and her child. And don't make us cry. You made me cry. I recall at least three committees. I don't understand how you've been able to just repeatedly relive this trauma and just talk to a room of strangers. But I know you're doing it to protect other families. What I mean, you're watching your child turn purple because he can't breathe. Um, what was it like being in that room? What are you saying to the police? What are you trying to do? I imagine you're just having horrible thoughts going through your head, but just tell us what was in your mind while you're
Yeah.
there.
Well, I, I just wanted to, sorry. First of all, the use of force was unnecessary. Um, at first, I didn't understand why they had to restrain him like that because he was not, he was compliant. He had no weapons. Um, he wasn't doing anything. He was just, you know, we were just following what they were doing. Yeah. So um I couldn't understand, but I had to stay calm and just, watch them. Um I did not say anything because I thought they knew what they were doing. I trusted them, and I I was just hoping that they would have, at least checked on him when I asked them if he was asleep twice. Um, there were a lot of, things going on in my mind, a lot of questions I wanted to ask. But when you're in that situation, it's really hard to say something because you're like shocked and you just want everything to be done um, and over with, without any incident. That's what I was hoping for that night. Um, didn't realize that my silence was, did not help at all, or my way of cooperating with them, and Angela too.
I think it's extremely reasonable for anyone to believe that the police would have had proper training. They're supposed to go through academies and have ongoing training. It's not like this is the first time a police officer has ever interacted with a civilian, right? You would think, but as we've seen, the amount of use of force complaints is extremely significant, and I don't know if it's the same in every state's sort of police guidelines, but I know in California, like the ratio of gun training and the use of force techniques compared to the amount of hours they spent on de-escalation, unbelievably lopsided. It's police are not trained to handle these situations, and we're going to talk, more later on some of the things you've done to work on that. But when you're saying, was he asleep? He's not moving, right? He's not presenting a threat to anyone.
No, he wasn't a threat at all.
And the restraint, the asphyxiation, as I understand, is kind of actually sounds pretty similar to George Floyd, in that there was a knee on like his neck or upper back, and that was compressing and not letting the oxygen flow.
Yeah, that's correct. In that position was
and that's when he started turning purple and just got motionless.
Well, you couldn't really see his face when he was on his stomach.
When
when they flipped him, on his side, that's when, when I saw the blood coming out from his mouth and he was limp. I knew he was dead because his eyes was rolled over to his head. I mean, I knew, that was it.
Bella?
Thank you. I just wanted to add a couple of things that I forgot or remembered now. One was to add to what my mom was saying. My brother had expressed to us before, if you're getting pulled over, for example, by a police officer, you don't need to talk back or anything, just completely comply. And it's the same for any circumstance with a police officer. The way that we felt in that instance was perhaps naively trusting, but also just compliant all three of us. And I've said before that my brother's biggest fears were the police and death. And even though he wasn't his usual self that night, and he was afraid, you could still see that those fears remained prominent, but he complied anyway. His last words that we remembered were, "Please don't kill me, please don't kill me." And the officers responded that they weren't going to kill him. And they also acknowledged that he was experiencing a mental health crisis and he wasn't in any trouble. He wasn't under arrest. And it sounded so calm. That's the thing about it. It sounded so calm. There were no guns or batons or fists. And it sounded even lighthearted when the officers laughed with each other and joked about Mom being strong. And the other thing I wanted to add, my mom often says, and maybe she'll rephrase this, but she took audio video of that night for my brother to realize that he really needs to prioritize getting help, because it was serious enough that we felt the need to call somebody to come over. And this was before any other resource existed that I could learn about. But Mom, if you wanted to expand.
Yeah, that's the saddest part of all these things. That audio video was supposed to be for Angelo to watch and to hear after that. But, unfortunately, they killed him. And, our reaction that night was, that's how we were raised culturally. When the police are there, or you just, comply. That's just, the way we were raised, just follow, just be quiet and respectful. So
I think 100% of every Black and brown person I've ever spoken to, parents, has said they've had a talk with their children that if the police, even if they're acting wild, just comply, just stay alive, because there's been so much violence imposed by police on people. I do think it's worth mentioning that tragedies like your family have also, there's another positive impact, a trend going on all over the country. Certainly here in the Bay Area, I know here in Oakland, we've adopted a macro, but rather than sending armed officers to a mental health crisis, and I can't even contemplate how anyone ever thought that made sense, that if you're in a state of paranoia or just, depression, anxiety, seeing people with guns walking towards you is not going to make you feel better. It's going to make you feel worse.
Yeah.
And so this trend towards sending, unarmed civilians that are trained in mental health crises, that is another positive outcome that, again, it's not going to help Angelo. It's not going to bring him back, but it is going to lead to less harm for families like yourselves. And that's worth talking about and fighting for. That, we can't unring the bell and undo the past, but we can do our very best to prevent these things from occurring in the future. And that's why your family's advocacy has been so powerful. Robert, when we started working on AB 1608, and we'll talk a little bit more on that in detail, but there were a number of issues you brought, and your family, of course, to the table that arose from Angelo's case. And part of it was just, the autopsy, the coroner stuff. Could you, as this tragedy occurs, you guys go talk to lawyers. Is there anything still actively in process? I understand there was an administrative investigation. You guys did an independent autopsy. There's been a lawsuit. Can you give us sort of the current update? Are those things now resolved? Are they still ongoing? Where are we?
Well, Brian, thanks for having us. That's a lot there because a lot has not been resolved. When this process began for our family, we were just really naive. My first personal demand it was that they released the body cam video, and I was so naive that literally that was my demand. I didn't know any better. I had no idea that Antioch was one of 6 or 7 communities in California that didn't have body cams. So it's one of the first things we demanded, and then the second demand we made is that we wanted Antioch to institute non-police mental health response teams as an answer to this kind of situation instead of sending police. And then the third demand we made of Antioch specifically was that they ban what we called at the time the knee to neck restraint. And that was one where Antioch was not willing to work with us. So we worked at the state level with Assemblymember Gibson, or actually we began with Assemblymember Bonta, and then he was elevated to the Attorney General position. And then we sort of did the rest of the work with Gibson. And really was about, again, I think throughout this, we weren't the first to propose this. As a matter of fact, this had failed the year before because at the last minute, the police had come in and whittled or watered down and kept the chokehold law, but removed the parts that would have, prevented positional asphyxia. And so it was really about bringing that back with Angelo's story in this case, and we were successful that year. But that's really, we weren't thinking of state action. We were thinking of local action, and when the locality was not receptive, then we moved to the state. And so we worked on a lot of local reforms where we could, and then state reforms where those were not doable. But as you said, for us, it was the arc of our knowledge of this case. So it began with an attorney telling us that when they have nothing, when they asphyxiate somebody, then they blame it on quote unquote excited delirium. We heard that the day after Angelo died. I don't know if it was the first time I'd heard it, but certainly the first time it stuck in my mind. And so the first year was positional asphyxia because that's how they killed Angelo. And again, we say they killed him. He died officially 2.5 days later, but again, he never shut his eyes, and his lungs were never able to breathe again on their own. He was always on a breathing machine. And so, technically and scientifically, we consider the heartbeat the issue with death, but his brain was 95% dead at that point. And so the fact that he could keep a heartbeat means that he lived officially for another 2.5 days. But in all essence, and for millennia, he would have been considered dead on that night. So the second year we worked on AB 1608 with you quite extensively and got to see a lot of you and many other great people. Again, it wasn't a new concept. There had been an attempt a few years earlier to establish an office of medical examiner because California is one of 3 states that still allows this kind of conjunction of having the sheriff become the coroner, and therefore those decisions are politicized and they're not necessarily based on pure science. Unfortunately, AB 1608 did not pass. This past year, we came back to the story of Angelo. So for us, it's been, we realized that this is not everything that needs to be done in policing, but it's our experience. So we're using our experience and our story to see what we can do. And so this year we were supporting of AB 360. And again, that's a law that bans excited delirium and other terminology like that has been fraudulently used to confuse the public with debunked medical science that really never existed to cover up for police misconduct when it came to tasers and or positional asphyxia. And so, sorry, that's the whole. So that's kind of on the side of the legislative, and so we've actually seen the launch of the Angelo Quinto crisis response team in Antioch. They were very successful in getting a team really quickly. I mean, 2 years is quick for a government to do this. But many questions persist regarding its future funding and other programs and how to make it better. From a familial perspective, the ongoing civil rights lawsuit is still ongoing. The determination by the sheriff coroner that Angelo died as an accidental death because of excited delirium is still being challenged by the family in a writ of administrative mandamus. That's a lawsuit against the county, or specifically the sheriff coroner, basically holding that their determination was incorrect and asking that they correct the record. That is still open. The last we had heard is that their official position is that we as a family did not have the legal standing to question that. And only the decedent would have the legal standing to question that document, in which case we don't know how to get in touch with Angelo for him to carry on the case, if you would. But you almost want to laugh at the tragedy that these parties commit as they further what is clearly to me a system that is corrupt and unfair, but because of their usual want to preserving their careers and so forth, they go to great lengths. And so that's where the family is currently. We still have asked for the determination by the DA in Contra Costa County, Diana Beckton, who determined that Angelo died from not only excited delirium, but also a fentanyl overdose that was kind of mixed into the whole thing, even though their pathologist doesn't say that. So it's a method of basically, throwing Angelo's reputation into question and introducing issues that really were never part of the original thing. But again, I suspect that career advancement is the central issue here. So we've gone to Attorney General Rob Bonta. They got us back in touch with the local DA in Contra Costa County, and we're still trying to work with them to correct, if you would, the record, so that at least the lies that they had in their report were not so blatant, if you would. Blaming it on excited delirium, which we hope doesn't exist anymore, and fentanyl, which was a curative thing given to him on the 25th. They have actually added another drug that was also given to him in the hospital, and they're blaming that as the cause of Angelo's death. The cover-up just keeps on going. But we are very hopeful that AB 360 and our support of that, with, again, many other people and other families that have been involved. But we hope that we're not talking about excited delirium anymore, and that we can begin to phrase our discussions about what was excited delirium and not what is excited delirium. And I think that we've seen some interest in Colorado and in Illinois in also introducing legislation. And as you know, the last medical organization, the one that was actually the one supporting excited delirium, has now changed its official position. And now there is no medical organization that in any way supports excited delirium, and basically, for the most part, they have all questioned its validity and usage. So sorry, I've gone out a bit long, but
well, no, you gave a great overall view. I appreciate that, but it was a lot to unpack, and so I want to break it down for our audience, and maybe also go to the end just real quick, and we'll talk about AB 360 later. But excited delirium was basically an invalid, not medically supported diagnosis, and I use that in air quotes because it was a fiction. I don't want to say 100% because there might be one outlying case, but it is basically only used in officer-related use of force cases, and it basically was a get out of jail free card. It's a fiction. It is not found in the medical literature. There was no basis for it other than this, one outlier agency, which, as you just correctly stated, has withdrawn their support and acknowledged that it is not a real thing. And so that by itself takes away a defense that police in this country have been using for a number of years. Like you said, it's not just like asphyxiation. Tasers is another one. It's like, yeah, we electrocuted someone and they died. It's like, oh, it must have been excited delirium. It's like, no, it's because you electrocuted them. You killed them. And I want to back up a little bit into the reason why, again, and also through Assembly Member Mike Gibson, worked on, we all sponsored 1608, which was intended to do, as you said, California is only one of 3 states that allows the sheriff and coroner to be the same individual. 58 California sheriffs, we have 58 counties. 0 of those 58 sheriffs have a medical degree, but they essentially have a veto. The underlying investigating officers can say, yep, we killed him. Sheriff goes, no, I don't accept that, and overrules it. And, you were mentioning, and let me even make one more clarification. You guys are not lawyers. You were not trained activists. So, I kind of feel like you're beating yourselves up a little bit by saying we were naive. That's 99% of the country. There's no way you should have reasonably known the body camera release footage, or that Antioch doesn't even have it. That's actually generally true in Contra Costa County. They have, and I think you'll agree at least somewhat to me, they have one of the worst sheriffs in the country on a number of issues, and in no way to derail this towards me, but my brother and I had 4 guns pointed at our heads when a license plate reader misidentified us. Contra Costa deputies pulled us over and put guns at our heads, and we had to sue them. We went to subpoena video, and they're like, yeah, we don't use body cameras. We don't have dash cameras. Now I know why. They don't want evidence. They don't want to be held accountable. And so your particular county is a nightmare for families trying to advocate for their rights. And so you couldn't have known what you didn't know. So I hope you guys don't, feel guilty or put pressure on yourself. You wouldn't have known that the sheriff coroner can overrule a trained medical professional. You wouldn't have known this excited delirium fiction is being used in these cases. You wouldn't, and that's most families. You were lucky enough, and if you know it well enough, if you're comfortable describing it, Contra Costa is a little unique in how they investigate these death cases, and with the sheriff coroner. And so if you could, that's also another thing you wouldn't have ever known, is how fast they take away the body. So if you can describe that part of your story a little bit, and that you thankfully had the financial means to do your own independent autopsy and what that revealed. Can you share that with our audience, please?
Yes. And thank you for the reminder that we are lay people, and it's completely natural to assume the things that we assumed or think or have thought the things we had thought. So when we had retained counsel, it was really important to us to make sure that we had an independent autopsy done. And that is a really expensive venture, I guess. And yeah, we were really lucky that we were able to make sure that happened. And part of that very short process of getting his body transferred to our independent pathologist was trying to ensure that the contracted pathologist and everyone involved on the county's end weren't aware that we were going to get one, so that they wouldn't potentially do something to the body, alter it, so that they wouldn't do anything to the body. And when we were finally able to have that done, the pathologist concluded that Angelo was his cause of death was restraint asphyxia or positional asphyxia. And Alternatively, the county determined his cause of death, as you've said before, to excited delirium. And the next part of that process is the coroner's inquest, which is the unique process in Contra Costa County, where a jury and something like a judge, more of a process overseer, will determine the manner of death. And there are 4 different manners that are possible. Those are accident, homicide, suicide, and death at the hands of another other than by accident. So at this inquest, they really operate under the guise of objectivity and independence, but it's very clear within the first 10 seconds of being there that that is not the case at all. First, when we arrived there physically, the process overseer, that's what I'll call him for now because I don't remember his title. He was in a room with the entire set of police officers and other related officials, and the public was locked out. We don't know what happened in that room, but they had their private time, and then the process began. And at the beginning of this process, this overseer read to a jury about, I guess, what was expected of them. The overseer explained that jury members should indicate whether they'd heard of any of the people involved in the case, so that they could take any necessary next steps. And then the overseer read the list of witnesses, including my brother's name. And so they named many officers and investigators, but ultimately they never named neither my mom or myself. They ended up not referring to either of us by name at all during the entire, 4-hour process. We were the mom and the sister, and somehow we weren't witnesses that were notable enough to name to the jury, despite our direct presence on the scene that night that they described even. And that was not the end. That was only the beginning of the complete bias we saw in that process. Further, we saw the process overseer basically feeding information to whoever was on the stand testifying. If they forgot something, this overseer would say, "Oh, I think you forgot this," or "Did you want to add something about this?" This person
coaching them.
Yes, coaching them. This person was coaching them completely. There were just so many mistruths, and it's really difficult to describe just the complete lack of independence and objectivity in that process. But ultimately, at that inquest, the pathologist that was contracted by the sheriff coroner was called to speak, and he introduced the cause of death as something that was poorly understood and highly controversial. And he said excited delirium, but at the coroner's inquest, there was also a detective who spoke on the stand and described my mom and I as suspicious for looking for our cat under cars in the driveway. This is something that everybody on the scene was aware of, that we were looking for a black cat because they had kept opening the door. And it's just so many small things like that. So many factual inaccuracies, a lot of catering to their own narrative. And ultimately, of course, the death was determined to be an accident by that jury, and it was very clear why. So moving forward, it's been really valuable to have that information, to have testimony from certain officers involved, and to hear some more of how that continues to change, whether in depositions in our civil case or just to the public, as it had changed maybe 3 times before. But I think, I'm sorry.
I'm just saying, I want to clarify for our audience something that is unique to a prosecutor. So in general, lawyers adopt the position of their client, and they're supposed to put on, a vigorous defense of their client, or if you're the plaintiff, you prosecute your case in a vigorous manner. That is not true for prosecutors. Prosecutors have a statutory and ethical duty to fight for justice, not to get a conviction, not to incarcerate people, but to ensure that justice occurs. That might mean and should certainly lead to at least sometimes, telling the truth, revealing holes in your own case, always being truthful in the information you provide to the opposing side. And there's all these tricks where you hide dirty officers and you hide documents and these things, and it's dirty. They're violating their duty as a prosecutor to ensure justice. And again, as lay people, you were talking earlier, like, oh, we just reasonably believe that police should have had training. You should also reasonably be able to believe what your government is telling you, that we should have trust in our civic institutions that they're going to do the right thing, because the prosecutor as an agent of the state is supposed to be for all of us, not just for XYZ police officer or sheriff deputy to get them off the hook. They're supposed to represent justice. And that's really, that was kind of the underlying heart of AB 1608, where we wanted to separate the role of sheriff from coroner, like the overwhelming majority of America has. This is an area where California is not progressive. We're extremely behind the times, but essentially a political elected animal with no medical qualifications whatsoever is allowed to overrule findings, maybe not even overrule them, but as you were saying, Bella, influence them. Even like just being in the room doesn't automatically mean you influence something, but when you're coaching people, leading questions, like you're feeding them information, the narrative that you want them. It's clearly a bias. It's by not putting you guys on the witness list, you're only providing the perspective that you want the jury to hear. And just this whole thing, and it's not a strong enough word for the personal tragedy stuff, but it was a farce. It was a sham. It was not a justice-seeking investigation. You guys got steamrolled by the state. That's like the injury upon the injury that you suffered. And if you hadn't had means to go get your independent autopsy, and Robert, was it 14,000, 17,000, something like that?
I think it was 17,000.
Yeah.
That one thing that I would add to what Bella said is that not only were they not called as witnesses, the lawyers, the family's lawyers, were allowed to put in some questions, but they were never read out loud or asked. So not only were they not called as witnesses, there was no opposing side. So think of a court case where there's only one side and the judge, in this case, the hearing officer, is actually coaching that one side as to how to win the case. It's beyond a farce, right? We would think that in the worst examples of other governments that we could make, they wouldn't come up with something so clearly farcical, because there's no opposing side, and even the hearing officer meets beforehand with the officers in close quarters and then opens it up and doesn't let anyone else speak. So we're talking about something that would have been, I always refer to as a Kafkaesque novel. There's only one side, and even the judge is biased towards that one side. It's actually even more one-sided. As a matter of fact, one of the officers that had testimony that wasn't as favorable to them, they just didn't put him in either. So they just put in the officers that they want even in that situation, they don't even put even their own witnesses that don't agree with the most radical version of what they want. And yes, that is our government. Let's not forget that is entirely our government. And so even though the process of the inquest is unique to Contra Costa County in California, I would argue that the process of having the sheriff and coroner, or they be the same, leads to this. And so it's not like the sheriff has to be in the room. The sheriff hired the hearing officer, and the sheriff hired every other witness that was allowed to speak. So there was no one that wasn't on the sheriff's payroll that day that could speak. Anyone else who would speak would be thrown out of the room, or they weren't in the room to begin with. That is not American jurisprudence as I've ever been taught in any TV show, except for maybe some really bad show, like maybe My Cousin Vinny, where they're in the Deep South and things are really corrupt. This was a much worse and more corrupt system than My Cousin Vinny ever was, right? This is a case where you didn't have a voice. So, sorry, I got a little caught up with that, but it's
that's what people need to understand about this situation. I think an additional point is the average American has less than $400 in savings. The average American family has less than $400 in savings. Even if you had good credit, the likelihood that you could get $17,000 in less than 3-4 days before they, destroy the evidence, which in this case is Angelo, that's just not realistic. And you don't even know where to go, how to do it. Like, you don't even know what the process is. It was a shooting gallery. They lined you up against the wall and just shot you. That there was no fight. There was no fair fight.
During Christmas and a weekend.
Right. Yeah. During Christmas. Exactly. Yeah.
But we were able to retain Dr. Benner Omalu, who is very famous for being the pathologist in San Joaquin County, whose investigation led to a lot of reforms in that county. And you're right, we were lucky enough to have retirement funds and things that we could raid to get that. And I'll tell you, when we were moving the body, it really was like an operation. No word to the funeral home. The moment the body arrived in the funeral home, we had a van waiting to be taken to Sacramento. The body wasn't there minutes. It was all choreographed because we were terrified. And this is what everyone told us, other doctors, if they know about it, they will contaminate the body, so you can't do anything with it.
And all they need is just a little bit of time, just a little window of time to make that happen. They don't need years, just a little bit of time, and you lose your chance to prove your case.
On top of that, the autopsy, we've gotten to know that there were 3 people in the room in that autopsy. One of them was an Antioch detective. Another one was a DA's office investigator. And those 2 other people, apart from the contracted pathologist whose entire business is doing business with the county and being paid by the sheriff coroner, those 2 other people were the ones that took pictures of Angelo. So guess what? They were trying to not take pictures of the eyes, because that's how a lot of ways in which you show particular hemorrhaging is typically a sign of asphyxiation. And so, they were involved in trying to dissuade the contracted pathologists from any finding that would be against their departments. So it shows you again, even in that autopsy, you've got Antioch police in the room as active participants in the autopsy. How can you possibly begin to trust that system? But we were naive. Brian, I've understood that this system is very unfair to folks without means, and there's 2 systems of justice. But I had no idea that we were living in a dystopian reality where certain people in power are abusing that. And I think Excited Delirium shows you the level that they've actually come up with a whole fraudulent medical science to protect themselves is symbolic of the level of corruption that we are experiencing in this country. And we just simply don't know it because it's been so sophisticated. It's not like it's a simple bribe somewhere. It's these folks are making 6-figure salaries and they're protecting that, and that's their corruption. But they've also grown pretty sophisticated in conducting hearings and confusing the public.
And I think that's actually a really great point, Robert, that there is a cottage industry of non-law enforcement professionals that law enforcement and the state in general uses to give this like veneer of scientific infallibility. We've been seeing recently, and even the FBI's expert witnesses have finally started conceding in open court, bite marks, hair microscopy, fingerprints are actually not accurate. They're finally admitting that we've been convicting people like, oh, it's so science-based. And it's not. It's a fiction. And families like yours are just getting railroaded into these tragedies and just injured and injured and injured because you don't get justice. And it's just, I just, well, obviously I feel horrible for you, but I'm also just so grateful that you're sharing these things and these stories. And so let's talk. We're talking about all the terrible stuff. Like, let's talk. So AB 490, Angelo's Law, finally, positional asphyxiation banned in California. That is a dramatic win.
Second state in the nation to ban it. I will remind everyone that as I know today, the George Floyd Act does not ban it, even though that's the way that George Floyd was killed. So it's sacrosanct in the sense of the police departments like to use it because it's such a powerful method. Depriving people of oxygen is a really good method of depriving people of being able to do anything, to do any power they had, because without oxygen,
yep,
they're unable to, well, do anything. One of the officers in this case has said that if they let him go, that he could have kicked him if they let him go of his legs. He's upside down on his stomach, and they're afraid that he could kick them from the limited movement that he's got. So, it just tells you how powerful that is. So the second state in the nation to ban it after Colorado.
Yeah, that's amazing. You've certainly influenced the trend towards civilianization, unarmed, trained mental health professionals showing up at a mental health crisis, not an armed police officer. And then, the big recent victory, and why we're here, helping celebrate your great wins, is AB 360, which was signed into law a few weeks ago. It'll go into effect January 1, which now says that the term, the defense of excited delirium is no longer admissible in court. That is a dramatic win. The New York Times picked you up. You already mentioned earlier that other states have been reaching out to you folks. Like, I'm so hopeful this goes nationwide. I think it's one of the most politically viable chances to go nationwide, because, people are finally pulling back the covers and admitting the truth that it was a completely made up thing. It just isn't real. And your family led the way on that. And I hope you maybe get a little sense of collective justice. You're not going to get the personal justice that you deserve, but on behalf of all the country and the people, the other families that you're helping, I hope you get a sense of justice and that your fight hasn't been in vain. If I just, I watched Cassandra, in those committees in 1608, and I know a number of it. We were working with Kaylin and Dennis. We were crying watching you guys. I don't think I could share a story like that over and over with strangers. Like, I don't, most people don't, you don't want to put your personal business out there, and to do it in this cold room, which especially in the early days was often unsympathetic to you. You would expect our legislative representatives to actually represent the people, but we all know, as we saw in 1608, the sheriffs don't lose. They've been untouchable. I don't secure justice. We've tried a lot going after sheriffs, and they just don't lose. And prior to secure justice, I bounced around a number of law firms. Like, I still do have great respect for lawyers and the law, but in this context, you certainly understand why people hate lawyers. Is they help hide behind the law. They create these laws that allow them to do these terrible, terrible things. It's like, it's legal. We didn't do anything wrong. Look, the law says we can do this. And it's just destroying innocent lives. And so I really hope you guys are encouraged that your fight hasn't been in vain, and you've done a lot of great good. Obviously in California, but it's going nationwide. You are influencing others.
Yeah.
And I'll just say, go ahead, please.
I mean, that's wonderful. Thank you for saying that about us. But I think we've been blessed with meeting so many other folks that were already fighting this fight. So many other families, as you know, in 1608, we particularly were really teamed up with the family of Oscar Grant and Miles Hall, and they were instrumental and for everything. We have, it's not alone. And then there's the ever amazing Assembly Member Mike Gibson, who's just, who went down in flames with us on AB 1608.
Yeah.
Even though it wasn't good for him, but he fought a valiant fight, and he's just been such an incredible advocate, and his attempt to just say, this is fraudulent, we're going to fight it. And I will remind folks that AB 360 doesn't just ban excited delirium; it actually bans the misuse of medical science in that way. It's entitled excited delirium, but it actually bans much more. So we're hoping with that, plus the national organizations coming out against it, that excited delirium is gone, but much more so that the fraudulent use of medical science gets curbed. But again, I just want to say that it's really not us. We're adding our story to many other families. We've met so many other families. We're working with other families. So thanks for the kudos. It's nice to feel that Angelo's death wasn't in vain. That is, he will be remembered and at least he didn't die, and he saves other people. Hopefully his death meant something to somebody else. But this is not something the family does alone. It's just we've joined other people like yourself and like the many of the people you've decided that we worked so closely with. Folks have been working at it for years, and we're happy when we can add to it and win. And in 1608, we weren't able to win. We saw the sheriffs come in at the last second and convince most of the Democratic legislators to go against it. But it wasn't the first one, and it won't be the last one, and maybe that's part of the process. So, there is hope that you can bring some truth out there, and we've been lucky to be able to do that. But it's not something one does alone, right? It's something that one does in groups. You join groups of people that have the same ideas, and then you work together. And we've been telling Angelo's story, and maybe there'll be other stories we'll tell in the future with other families.
That's a great point. I'm glad you brought up Miles Hall, Oscar Grant. Those didn't happen yesterday. They've been doing this fight for a minute. And they were part of our coalition, our sponsorship group that worked on AB 1608, because they also suffered, very similar tragedies at the hands of the state. And they've been, fighting on in remembrance of their loved ones. And it is important. I'm really glad you brought up that Assembly Member Gibson went down in flames with us for this reason. I have personally worked with a number of legislators that sacrifice their principles just to get the win. We end up abandoning the bills because they just gut them and it's not worth supporting anymore, or it actually gets even harmful and it distorts the original vision. He didn't do that. He could have taken the win and ruined his own bill. And, his love of your family and just his own principles, he stood with us. And so that is important, that we recognize the people that stick their necks out for us. And I think, Bella, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, well, I guess two things now, just adding to that. With 1608, one of the biggest things that happened to take that down was that after receiving very minimal opposition up until the Senate floor, the sheriffs they realized, wow, this could potentially pass, and they went in hard, and they tried to make it so that the bill actually enabled them to continue their current process of hiring a contracted pathologist who they claimed would be independent. And that, like you said, would have just solidified what they currently do and made that bill harmful. And even if Assemblymember Gibson didn't have the direct experience in real time that we were having, he trusted that experience and he valued that, and that is something that shows his strength of character more than I think most other everyday things could. So then the second thing I just wanted to add was about 360 for listeners. I don't know if they're aware. There's a really, really it's what is the word? There's a really thoughtful report on excited delirium that was created by PHR, Physicians for Human Rights, which is national. We were lucky enough to contribute in some small way to it, and to their webinar. And they talked a lot about the history of it, including the racist roots of some of the symptomology, such as imperviousness to pain and superhuman strength. And they just did such important work in really shedding light on just how unscientific the diagnosis is, and the fact that it's, I guess, not just a single diagnosis. Kind of like my dad was saying, this bill 360 doesn't just rule out excited delirium. It's more comprehensive than that, and that's something to be aware of moving forward, especially for other states. Maybe for people who aren't as aware of this yet. There are so many new terms. We've already heard agitated delirium, hyperactive delirium. Add any adjective to delirium you want, and that's what they're going to go with next. But it's not just about a name. It's about this concept that somebody dies in a way that is supposedly unknown to the actual perpetrators. And that should not be allowed to fly in any sort of circumstances. So from now on, we are really, really hopeful that people can just list if they think caffeine killed someone, or if they claim caffeine killed somebody, for example, put caffeine as the cause of death. Don't put something fake. Don't put spontaneous combustion. So those are just some things I want to add.
Well, actually, even if, let's say, excited delirium is real, the symptoms that they attribute to excited delirium, Angelo did not have, not a single one of them. So it just only shows the arrogance, and that they know that they will get away with it, and people will believe it. Yeah. And I think the common denominator when somebody is experiencing excited delirium, they only die when they are being restrained by a cop.
Or tased.
But like what I said, if excited delirium was real, we can have excited delirium, but we're not going to die because we're not being tased. We're not being, restrained by a police. You're only going to die when you're being tased and restrained by a police.
Yeah, and I think you guys raised both, critical observations, and that they're essentially victim blaming, or saying it's some third party, but definitely not me. I didn't do it. And of course, the fact pattern shows that's true. Again, like to your point, Cassandra, is even if excited delirium was real, it didn't arise until this officer put his knee on the back of Angelo's neck. Your actions, Mr. Officer, caused a certain reaction. Yeah. Right? I could die of a heart attack. You come scare me and I die of a heart attack, you have liability. You come at me with guns and beat me and I die of something that is medically established, like a heart attack. Well, it's because of what you just did, and so that is very important, like you said. And I really like that, Bella, how you're saying we can't over define certain terms to where it's just excited delirium only, because you're right. When the intent is to escape culpability, they're going to just change the words. They're going to just change the phrases. And so we do have to be mindful to make it more broad so that we aren't creating loopholes in our legislation. Those were great points that you raised. I appreciate that. We're out of time. I want to thank all three of you very much for sharing this story, for talking to us about it. Wish you nothing but love and ongoing success. I know you're not going to stop fighting. I can just see it in your eyes. And we're all benefiting from it. We're benefiting from your work. And, Angela will be proud of that. Everybody will be proud of that. Miles Hall, Oscar Grant, everybody else that's suffered these tragedies is seeing families like you fight on in their names. And that's a really powerful thing. And you're right, Robert, it might take a few years. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it. Or if it was easy, maybe there'd be no need for it. But these big fights, philosophical, ideological, cultural, they take time. It takes time to turn the ship around in the right direction. But you guys are doing great work doing that. It's very powerful. So just want to say thank you guys.
Thank you too. And we look forward to working with you in the future as we continue to navigate this.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, appreciate it.